Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dyl Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo, and welcome to my continued New York Film Festival 62 coverage here on the channel. I know I've been trickling these videos out slowly and surely, but I really want to make sure that you're getting the best formally formulated opinions I can make, especially for films like this, like Paul Schrader's newest, which is called Oh, Canada, not to be confused with the song or the country, though that is obviously a part of it, of course. But Paul Schrader, a writer and director I'm very fond of. I haven't seen a lot of his directorial work, but I love his written work, especially Taxi Driver, one of the most iconic films of all time. And just knowing that he was going to be there presenting the film, a new film that I knew very little about aside from the title and a bunch of the actors. And all of these actors are actors that I am super fond of. Richard Gere, big fan of his. Michael Imperioli, I'm a massive Sopranos fan, so I was so excited to see him in this thing. Uma Thurman as a Tarantino buff, I love her. I'm very excited to see her in this film. And Jacob Elordi, who's like this up-and-coming next great leading man for this new generation of Hollywood. So I was really excited to just see this cast and this director at work with one another, because I knew very little, next to nothing about this film. But I'm also glad I got to take some time to think about it, because I think this is a film that is very hard to just explain in terms of plot and premise to someone who has not seen it. You know, it's one of those things you kind of just have to see to kind of understand what it is, because it is very experimental in terms of its form. It kind of bounces back and forth between two timelines. It kind of has an unreliable narrator, so you don't even know what is truth, what isn't truth. There is a lot of interesting liberties taken formulaically, which I appreciate, but I also think can be very alienating for a viewer. But I'm going to try my best to explain at least the basic core premise of this film, which is about a documentarian, Leonard Fife, who is played by Richard Gere, and he is old in his age. He is dying of cancer. He's recently been diagnosed with a very terminally pretty aggressive stage of cancer, and he is basically asked to be his own documentary subject for a different documentary. Michael Imperioli plays kind of the head of that documentary team, and they sit him down and basically ask him questions because they are making a documentary about draft evasion for Vietnam, and Richard Gere's character back in the day was one of those draft evaders who fled the draft and I think moved to Canada or fled to Canada, hence the title. And the younger version is played by Jacob Elordi. So that is kind of the basic premise, and it kind of chronicles, you know, this stage set with like documentarians asking questions to other documentarians while they're filming this documentary, and then you can kind of see all these flashbacks to Jacob Elordi as this younger version of this character and his build-up, his romances, his relationships. Uma Thurman plays Richard Gere's wife, so you also see how like her kind of integration into the relationship comes, and how that kind of falls apart or reconnects at times, and that kind of roller coaster of a relationship. Again, there's a lot of things going on that I definitely appreciate. I appreciate that Paul Schrader is putting a spotlight on the documentary filmmaking style and the way documentarians, you know, go about their work. I thought that was very interesting. I thought the interesting conversations about draft evasion, again, were very interesting. I think some of the relationships and the performances in these relationships were fine. The problem is I don't think it all quite comes together in a cohesive whole that made it pleasing for me to watch. I think it's a little boring. I think the actual pacing is pretty dull, and I think it lulls between scene to scene to scene. And I do think because you're just jumping from present to past to present to past, it's usually an effective filmmaking device. But for this film, because I couldn't fully engage, especially because of the unreliable narrator of it all as well, and because Richard Gere's character is a little bit, you know, he's snobby, he's a little bit of a grouchy old man, reasonably so, but you know, I never felt fully engaged with this character to feel fully engaged with his story, past or present. And I do think it was just too much bouncing around between timelines. The drama is very melodramatic, it's very dry. There's not a lot of comedy, and when there is comedy, it feels a little out of place. It just felt a little dull, a little drab, and a little boring for me. And it is a short film, but when looking at the runtime of this film compared to a lot of the other films I saw at the festival, I would have thought this was in like the upper third of runtimes based on what I saw. But in actuality, it was probably the shortest film I watched at the festival. So I was definitely surprised that a film that was paced as sluggishly as this definitely came across longer than it actually was. And this was a film that did breeze by in runtime, but it didn't feel like it did. And I do think there is something to be said just about overall ambition as a filmmaker. And Paul Schrader, you know, he talked about this film at the Q&A and talked about how this was a very deeply personal story to tell, because this was inspired by the passing of one of his best friends from cancer. So I do think, you know, when you have that context, it definitely makes the film better. And I do think, you know, directors should be able to make whatever they want to make, however they want to make it. Obviously, there's that sentiment where when the director makes a film and it's out there, it's for the audience, it's for the fans, it's for the people who are watching it to interpret it. It's no longer the director's film. But I also kind of push back on that a little bit because this is very clearly a love letter made by a man to a friend, that, is deeply personal and deeply emotional for him. And I think when you make something so personal and so close to your chest, it is harder to kind of find that mass appeal because of it, because you're making stuff in your own head. You don't think about the overall grand appeal of the product you're making when you're making it. So I understand, yes, it's for the fans. And like I said, as an audience member, I wasn't engaged. I didn't love this film. I was quite bored by this film. But I also understand that this really wasn't a film that Paul Schrader cared about the audience when he made it. He wanted to make something for him. And I appreciate that. I admire that. It doesn't make me like this film much more than I did before, but it does make me at least understand why I'm not connecting with it quite as much as I would have liked to, because it's clear that it is a very deeply rooted personal story for Paul Schrader. And you know what? I appreciate that. I can admire that. I think every director deserves their one, which is like for them. Like this is my film and this is only for me. And I don't care if 0% of the people out there like it. I know there are some people who like this. I talked to some people after the screening. Some people liked it, but I think, every director kind of earns that one, especially when you've had a career like Paul Schrader's, especially when you've had that notoriety and you're working with such great talent, because even if you can't be engaged with the story, the performances are still great. Obviously, as I said, some of the drama is very hammy, especially some of the stuff with like Uma Thurman and Richard Gere, like a lot of the relationship stuff is very over the top. But I do think there are still great nuances and subtleties in all the performances, even in Richard Gere and Uma Thurman's performance. Obviously, I love seeing Michael Imperioli back on my screen whenever and wherever. I actually binged The Sopranos a little while ago and re-binged it and didn't see him in a lot of movies. And then now I've been seeing him everywhere. I saw him on White Lotus. He's in this thing. He was also on Broadway in Enemy of the People, which brings me to my next segue point, because I know a lot of people ask me, because it obviously broke the news, that there was a big protest in the middle of the screening. Two people jumped up on the stage with a banner about halfway through the film. It was pretty deep into the film. They were members of the Extinction Rebellion, which is basically a protest group advocating against climate change, trying to preserve the environment and the climate. And I actually think that it is a very admirable and bold message to send. Obviously, we have to care about the environment. It is important to put the environment on blast, or at least put the people who are kind of manipulating the environment and climate change on blast. And I thought it was very bold and powerful to do so, especially because I wasn't really digging the movie too much. I think it was like a jolt of electricity that kind of woke me up in a sense. I wasn't falling asleep at the movie, but I was lulling. I was feeling the boredom sink in. And when that happened, when I saw these two guys get up and just start running down, I was like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And they jumped on stage. Now, I know obviously the big con of this is like it is a film festival. Everyone's there. They've spent a lot of money. A lot of people have spent a lot of money to sit in this theater, dress very nicely. Maybe some of them are on dates. Some of them are celebrating something. Some of them are celebrating each other. Some of the filmmakers were there. Michael Imperioli, Paul Schrader, Uma Thurman, they were in attendance. And then you have this disruption during the movie. And I think that is kind of the biggest downfall of protests during film festivals, is that like it's a little rude to the art form, to the artists who are there to celebrate it. I do think, for them and their disruption of that immersion, it is a big downfall. And I do know how a lot of people, I saw it with my own eyes and ears, seeing how people got so angry and so upset. But I also think for a movie all about draft evaders, and kind of this big protest piece on the Vietnam War, I think it's a little hypocritical to be like telling those protesters who are protesting climate change to like go kill themselves and like F off, and you were a disgrace of a human being. Like, I get it. They disrupted a movie, and I think any disruption of a movie sucks. Talking, texting, I hate having a phone anywhere near me when watching a movie. I don't know how people do it, and I've had a lot of qualms with friends about that stuff. But like, I get it. It's a disruption of a movie and it sucks. But I also think the message, and I think because the message is something that is very rooted in hope and wanting to make the world a better place and clean up our environment and make it a safer place and a safer air to breathe. I do think I do think it was a little over the top. Some of the reactions were a little over the top. Yes, you can definitely be annoyed that the movie was interrupted. I was annoyed that the movie was interrupted. I was like, man, I was watching that. And they did rewind the film. They stopped the film. They rewound rounded a few beats. This wasn't projected on film, it was digital, so they were able to do that. Now, if it was a film, like an actual projected film, I do think there are issues with that because you have to restart the film from the top. You can't just like find it in the middle when you're projecting actual film. But this was a digital clip, so like I'm fine with them like backtracking it a few minutes and then just playing it again. But there were some people who were just like outraged and screaming and sending like verbal death threats to these people, and I get both sides is what I'm saying here. I think it's wrong to disrupt a movie, and I think if they were to do it, they should have done it either right after the film, before the Q&A started maybe, or done it right before the film started, maybe when they like play that New York Film Festival trailer and then we're gonna get segued to the film. Maybe that would have been a good time to stand up and say something. I think doing it during the film was wrong, but I do think because of the messaging and the film we were watching, I do think some people's reactions were a little overreacting. But you're warranted to feel however you feel. I just felt like I needed to address it because it's also something I've never seen at a film festival, and because it wasn't rooted in any sort of like violence or danger. I feel comfortable talking about it. If this ended up becoming a violent protest, that is obviously not okay. Peaceful protest all the way. But I think just the fact that these two guys got up there and stood up and said something, it's something I've never seen at a film festival. I was just so intrigued by it that I had to get on here and talk about it because I've never seen anything like it on a massive stage like that before. And I brought it up because of Enemy of the People, because actually the same Extinction Rebellion protest group actually showed up at a performance of Enemy of the People and basically did the same thing, basically speaking out about climate change. And Michael Imperioli was also in that show. So I feel bad for him because this is twice now where he's been in the middle of his art and it's been interrupted by protesters. And some people have been saying like, oh, maybe it's been staged, maybe not. I don't think this was staged, at least not in the film festival. Maybe for Enemy of the People, there were elements of it that were staged. And I do believe Michael Imperioli and Jeremy Strong stayed in character when it happened on Broadway. But it's just interesting that it's happened twice, and both times it's happened that I've seen it, it has been with Michael Imperioli in attendance. So Michael Imperioli, I'm sorry for you. I can understand that it might be a really, really tough deja vu, but a very fascinating moment that I just felt like talking about because I think it just opens up a very interesting discussion of like, when is protest okay? When is it not okay, especially when it's peaceful? Is there ever a moment where it shouldn't be allowed? But also, like, as film goers, as people who invest so much of our life into something we love so much as cinema, what does that do to us when our immersion is interrupted? I'd much rather be interrupted by a very peaceful, very meaningful protest than by someone like ringing their phone very loud or someone like snoring openly in a theater, which I have experienced both those cases, not at New York Film Festival, but other places. So I don't know. I just thought it was a very interesting moment that I wanted to talk about. But the film itself, not a big fan. I think the most interesting talking point was the protest that happened in the middle of it. And that's not to take away from the film. Obviously, it has its fans. It's just not necessarily for me. So that is my review for O Canada. If you've seen it, let me know in the comments below what you thought. If you're excited to see it, it should be coming out soon. Richard Gere, Michael Imperioli, Uma Thurman, Jacob Elordi. Great cast. I hope you enjoy it a lot more than I did. But stay tuned. We still got a few more things coming up the wazoo here for the New York Film Festival. And also keep an eye out because there was also another pretty remarkable film festival first for me that happened at the New York Film Festival. And it's a much more positive first than the protest. It is the Criterion Closet truck actually came to the New York Film Festival, and I actually got a chance to go in. So I am going to be sharing my video from my exploration of the Criterion Closet on this channel very soon. So stay tuned for that video as well, alongside the rest of my reviews here for New York Film Festival 62. Otherwise, I'm Dylan. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.